Good morning and welcome to everyone. 90 years ago, in 1933, Herbert W. Armstrong, who was an ordained pastor in the Church of God Seventh Day, broke away from that church and started the Radio Church of God. We changed the name in 1968 to the Worldwide Church of God, and also changed the name again in 2009 to become Grace Communion International. It was on the 9th of March 1963 that little church had spread to South Africa, and the first church service was held in Braamfontein, here in Johannesburg. Today we are gathered to celebrate 60 years of Grace Communion International in South Africa. I want to give an introduction of how we got here. Herbert Armstrong, the founder of GCI, was committed to biblical truth as he understood it. And for that reason, he started a magazine called the Plain Truth Magazine. At the height of its circulation, it was higher than the Times magazine. It had 8 million copies being circulated around the world every single month. Throughout his life, Armstrong changed his doctrines if he believed that the Bible was teaching something different. To emphasize this point of allowing the scriptures to correct his doctrines when they are wrong, he wrote the following in his autobiography on page 360. But no person can acquire all truth instantaneously. The human mind receives knowledge gradually. The child of God must grow in the knowledge of our Lord. Also, he must have the spirit of repentance, always ready and willing to acknowledge error and to turn from it. The scriptures are profitable for reproof and correction, as well as instruction in knowledge to us. And God corrects every son he loves. He believed that fully. And many of those who have been in the church over the last 60 years will remember how many of the church doctrines continue to change over the years. Many of the things that Mr. Armstrong believed when he started the church in 1933 were no longer what he believed in 1986 when he died. The one thing that made him break away from the Church of God Seventh Day in 1933 was their reluctance to change from doctrines that he believed were wrong. Between 1927 and 1930, he wrote to the church leadership of the Church of God Seventh Day about a doctrine which he believed was wrong. And he asked them whether they agreed that it was wrong, and if they agree, whether they are going to change it. The church wrote back to him through the president of the Church of God Seventh Day at the time, and they acknowledged that the doctrine was wrong. He writes in his autobiography on page 361 that the president of the Church of God Seventh Day was forced to admit in plain words that their teaching on this point was false and in error. But the president feared that if any attempt was made to correct that false doctrine and publicly confess the truth, many of their members, especially those of older standing and heavy tithe payers, would be unable to accept it. He feared they would lose confidence in the church if they found it had been in error on any point. He said he feared many would withdraw their financial support and it might divide the church, and therefore he felt the church could do nothing but continue to teach and preach this doctrine, which he admitted in writing to be false. End of quote. And that is the one thing that the church, Worldwide Church of God, was not afraid of doing. It was not afraid of changing its doctrines. In the 1970s, the issue of the Old and the New Covenant became an issue in the church. And in December 1978, Mr. Armstrong wrote an article in the member magazine called The Good News, titled The Plain Truth About the Covenants. In that article, unfortunately, Mr. Armstrong came very close to the truth, but he rejected it because it would give proof that GCI was the only true church. This is what he wrote in that article, which was to address questions which the GCI pastors were starting to ask him. He wrote in the article, "Then what are we under today?" Meaning, what covenant are we under today? "The old covenant is ended," he wrote. The Apostle Paul said, God who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 6. Yet the new covenant has not yet been made. Its terms and conditions have been revealed to us through Christ. We ministers preach it. And even though as a final marriage covenant, it has not been made, that is, in contract language, signed, sealed, and delivered, those whom God has called are privileged to have God's law written in our hearts, to have the life-begetting, sin-overcoming Holy Spirit to open our minds to spiritual understanding, to guide us in God's ways, and within us to empower us to overcome Satan and do the work of God. So it was very clear in December 1978 that Mr. Armstrong was completely convinced that the old covenant had ended. However, he denied that the new covenant had started. In his view, the new covenant will only start when Jesus returns. And that's where he went wrong in his conclusions. And prophetically, in 1986, the cover of the Plain Truth magazine in January of 1986 read, "What's ahead for 1986 and beyond?" And on the 7th of January that year, 1986, Mr. Armstrong announced that Joseph T. Catch Sr. will replace him when he died. And 9 days later, on the 16th of January 1986, Mr. Armstrong died and Joseph T. Catch Sr. became the president of GCI. And the questions about the old and the new covenant that Mr. Armstrong tried to address in December 1978 continued to arise. And Mr. T. Catch appointed a doctrinal committee of church leaders at headquarters to review the question again. And on the 24th of December 1994, Mr. T. Catch preached a 3-hour sermon titled The Old and the New Covenant, which changed GCI into a new covenant church. Now, we have asked our members to tell us about their experiences in GCI over the last 60 years. Here are their testimonies.
One of my greatest and most special memories of the church was going to the feast every year. I used to thoroughly enjoy the trip, the people, 2 services a day, chatting with people afterwards, going out together. Another special memory of years ago is SCP. SCP, which for me was a real passion, and for 40 years as a family we were part of SCP. My sons first as campers and then as staff. I really felt that SCP was one of those special things in the church that was an outreach, because to this day I would suddenly meet somebody in the street, don't know him, don't recognize him, and he'd say, "Auntie Mary." My best memories are of SCP, and I'm telling you now, it changed some things in my life. It gave me different ways of thinking. It shaped different things in my life.
You meet a lot of people and you come to know people are different and everybody is different, but each one has got a being to serve God and to be closer to each other, to help other people. Also, for instance, I met this one chap that came to me, and he said he won't be here today. He wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for what I said. And I asked him, I spoke about it. I can't remember what I said, but he said it was 20 years earlier on that I said something positive, and that helped him to stick on and to just go on in life.
Started to realize more about the grace of God when we came through a stage in the church with very difficult changes. That was a very difficult period. Only after many difficulties and thoughts of working through it did I come to realize the wonder of God's grace. It was at that time when I first realized with actual excitement that my mother, who had died when I was only 21, and she was a powerful influence in my life, she taught me the love of God. The thought that this woman didn't make it into God's kingdom because she wasn't a member of the church, to realize that that was not true, it really, really hit me what grace was and the truth of grace. The truth is that God is the judge, not man. And that was a wonderful experience for me. I thank God for the teaching and the guidance that I've received in this very special family. This family that I'm privileged to be part of, where I've learned God's grace, God's love, God's understanding. And I do pray that the church goes forward, this body of which we're a part, with Christ as its head. We go forward in truth and understanding and continue to learn of His love and grace. It's such a privilege to sit here and to share with my brothers and my sisters of 60 years celebration in this church from worldwide to GCI, but one body, one faith, one love.
Lots and lots of love from Andres and Mary.
I really can't speak English. You will correct my English. In the Northern Cape is Afrikaans. In the year 1962, me and my husband was listening to the news on the radio. There was no TV. Half an hour later after the news, we hear a voice saying, "The world tomorrow." My name is Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong. The Worldwide Church of God. So we listened until he was finished. After then, my husband was trying to find an address and phone numbers. He received from Mr. Hull and Dr. McCarthy. From then, Mr. Hull was visiting a few small towns in the Northern Cape. We start visit the church in Bloemfontein. In Bloemfontein, we met Mr. John Kotzer and Mr. Jan Dyer, also from Kimberley. So we were having Bible studies every Saturday, led by Mr. Kotzer in Kimberley.
Hello everyone. It's such a pleasure to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the church. Incidentally, it also incorporates the celebration of the Jubilee year for some of us. Those that have spent at least 50 years in the church will be celebrating the Jubilee along with the 60th anniversary. I came into the church in 1973. I have made a lot of friends, so locally and internationally, and it's been a wonderful experience for me. I got to know the pastor in the old Transkei, I think we call it the Eastern Cape today, Pastor Maxwell Porno, and he became a very close friend. And we did lots of things together. And we traveled, we visited, and we were bonded like brother and, like brothers, soul brothers. We went down to Durban as we would do every year to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacle. And then, of course, that year, I was driving, I had a car. So when we got there, the festival was exciting. At the end of the festival, on the day that we were supposed to come back, the car just wouldn't start. And we couldn't come back. It was 8 days later and we couldn't come back. So we had to spend an extra 2 days in Durban at Dungababa trying to get the car going. And eventually the car was repaired by one of our members. And it just shows you how good the church was at the time. And it is still good today.
So in 1972 I came to South Africa with my husband and 3 children, and we went, and the first time we went to Johannesburg, where my husband started his job, and because of that and the children going to school, I felt very lonely, and I came and got a magazine, The Plain Truth. And I became very interesting. In the first few years I went to the Bible study every week, in the German school in Johannesburg. But the change came when my husband was transported, to Durban. And that is when we came to Durban here. And also there I went straight into the Bible study.
Hello, GCI. Pastor Emeritus George Marshall. Somewhere in the 70s, I was introduced to a Plain Truth magazine, and that magazine made me realize that I'm getting into something serious here. And I've seen God deliver me from tight and difficult situations, and from receiving His blessings to prove that He is good, He is faithful. He'll always defend His reputation, which demonstrates that no, He's the same yesterday, today, tomorrow, and forever.
I attended my first meeting in the Zion Hall in Johannesburg. It was just prior to Tabernacles. It was September, and so the church all left, and I didn't know what kind of church this was, but I'm all on my own. After one meeting, I'm all on my own almost. Anyway, I went to the next feast in '67, Scottburgh, got baptized. Now, one of my lovely things about is our preaching and our teaching, but I really believe God blessed us plus with amazing music ministry. I said, you guys have written the most wonderful songs with the most wonderful music. You are enthused. You are everything a church could want. And another, I'm running out of time, is how you involve the children. You've got them up there singing, dancing, hitting the tambourines. They can't wait to pick up their little instruments. It's such a reflection of, and you do it with all ages. You do it with the youngsters, and you've got the teenagers opening and closing in prayer, and speeches and all kinds of things. So I say GCI, well done for a wonderful team of wholehearted giving opportunity church. What more can I say? Goodbye.
I was baptized in 1971 and my wife in 1972. Attended my first Feast of Tabernacles in Mossel Bay in 1971, and my wife and our daughter, our last daughter, in 1972. And of course we stayed in Bushbuck Ridge where we were alone. There was nobody. So going to the feast was always something to look forward to. I've been in the church, say, for about 50 years or just a bit more than 50 years. And I've gone through the various changes that the church went through. When I came into the church, when we had a president for life in Mr. Armstrong, followed by Mr. Joseph Tikash Sr. But Mr. Joseph Tikash, rather Dr. Joseph Tikash, decided to change that and retired as president and also later as chair of the board.
Greetings, everyone. I just would like to say a few words about the special commemoration day for the Worldwide Church of God, which started in 1963 in South Africa. I was privileged to have been in contact with the church around 1969 when I got the advert on Plain Truth magazine, and I read quite a number of articles. I was quite surprised with the information they gave us, and I wanted to find out even more. I became a donor, and around 1973, I was told that I was ready to be baptized. So I got baptized in 1973. And my wife was baptized in 1974.
Greetings, everyone. I've been exposed to the church literature in 1969, 54 years ago. A friend of mine gave me a booklet called The Ten Commandments. Having been somebody who has not been attending church, who has never read the Bible, it made such an impact on me that I had to buy myself an English Bible. From there, I applied for the Plain Truth magazine, and I got my own literatures. We started reading with a friend of mine. We inquired about the office that issues these literatures. We referred to a Johannesburg office, which we did visit, and we met somebody there. I think it was Mr. Gordon de Blanche, and they explained quite a number of things to us. To cut the whole story short, yes, we began to tithe those years, my friend of mine, my friend and me. And as we went on, a couple of years ago, thereafter, I should say, we were invited to a church service in Soweto, Johannesburg, in Dube in particular. By that time, I had married. I had to leave my home in Hammanskraal 4 a.m. with my wife and 2 young kids, get on the goods train from Hammanskraal to Pretoria, from Pretoria take a train to Soweto. We enjoyed the services there. I think the leader of the church then was Mr. Bob Fay. Some of you will know him. And yes, we enjoyed everything else, the teachings and everything else you can imagine those days. We used to come back home, arrive back home at 7 p.m. because, we only used trains. From Soweto to Pretoria was better, they were faster. But from Pretoria to Hammanskraal, we had to wait for goods trains and so on and so on. That's why we had to come back home late. But those were the days.
Hi everyone. Just want to tell you my story about WCG. I started attending services in March 1973. Church was very legalistic. We kept the Sabbath on Saturday. We kept all the holy days. We had no birthdays, no Christmas, and the women were not allowed to wear makeup. Well, as you can imagine, this was very bad for family relationships. But then, an amazing miracle occurred in the mid-90s when Joseph de Kutch was in the leadership. He introduced us to the new covenant, and it was quite amazing. We struggled a bit to get the principles into our mind, but it was soon wonderful because it was a great relief.
Greetings GCI family and happy anniversary to everybody. I'd like to thank all our pastors and leadership who have just taken us through this journey of 60 years of grace. My name is Samu and my husband is Salim Caesar. We have 2 children and a grandson. I'll take you through this journey by showing you the collage that I've prepared for us all just to look at and see how this journey has been for us in Caesar family. These are my parents. They brought me up in the church. We were in Swaziland there, and I grew up, yes. Then I met my husband and we started attending the Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Tabernacles is actually the highlights of all the activities that we have in the GCI family.
I'm Elizabeth Wenger.
And I'm Sam Wenger. I'm Elizabeth's husband.
So when did you come into the church?
We came into the
Contact
church.
we had 1975 after the feast in Pretoria.
Okay.
We were not allowed to go to the feast, we weren't baptized.
Okay. So when were you baptized?
In April 76.
Okay. And yourself?
It's actually not that we were not allowed to come to church. We were on honeymoon when the feast was in Pretoria.
Okay, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yes. We had Mr. Melty and Mr.
When is your anniversary?
11th of September.
In September, yeah.
So you got married in 75,
75.
75.
In 76 we came in, we were baptized.
Okay, and who baptized you?
Mr. Nelty,
Mr. Frank
Nelty.
Nelty, yeah.
Because he was German speaking, and me with my German background, it was difficult to understand all the English words from the Bible.
Okay. But I want to give you a little story since it gets recorded. When I was a young man, I got the Plain Truth magazine. And I don't know how I got it, but it came every month. And I read the magazine very eagerly, and it wasn't the English version, it was the Klar und Wahr in German. And my mother read it as well, and I understood from what was written by mainly Mr. Armstrong that when you earn a salary, you must give a tenth to God. I mean, I was tithing, but I didn't want to tithe to a church organization. My 10% went to the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Lambarini. Now, Albert Schweitzer, those that listen to this now, you Google Albert Schweitzer and you will discover a very, very great man that has worked as a medical doctor in Central African Republic, I think it is. And when I came to South Africa, I could not send the money out of the country anymore. Then it dawned on me, well, maybe I should give it to this organization. They give me the magazine for free. They deserve to have it. And from then on, obviously, the contact with the church at some stage sparked and took off.
Okay. Beautiful story.
Yeah.
So which pastors did you get to know during those years?
Well, obviously Mr. van Belkom and Mr. Nelty, because I needed somebody who understood my German questions.
Yeah. Brian Matthew, Peter Hawkins, Terry Browning, Peter Nathan, mostly with their wives, obviously, because we were looking after their children. Mr. Bob Fay. And
you say you're looking after their children? What do you mean?
When they had to go once a year to the conference in Pasadena, they needed someone to look after their kids, bring them to school and care for them.
Okay. And you did that?
Yeah.
Which children was it?
For the Van Belkoms. For
the
3
Van
weeks,
Belkoms.
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Or babysitting just on off time.
Yes. You know, for one day, one night, 2 days.
So you stayed close there?
Well, we were near the German school. Our little house was near the German school. And because we had our children came late, it was just for us to lock the front door and go and do our thing with helping out.
Yeah.
Then whom we got to know as well was Owen Willis from Kenya, Melvin Rhodes, and there was another minister, a shortish fellow. His name hasn't come back to mind. And whom else was there? Obviously Sidney Hull, Morgan Kriedemann.
How old were you guys when you got baptized? Do you remember?
I was 26.
26. And you
25.
25.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So you're still a young couple. And when you get married in 75, you were just coming to the church at that time.
Yes.
Well, we wanted to get married in the church, and we asked the church. We had in mind. Look, since we are sending them a tenth of our salary, they are the ministers that can marry us.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you're logic, isn't it? And they wouldn't.
They wouldn't marry you?
No, they said, oh, look, if we can't marry you unless you have attended the church for a little while, like I think most of the churches in those days during apartheid had. And I think it was a good standard. But then they said, look, you're perfectly okay if you go before a magistrate's court and you do your vows there. And we did that. And then we had, for a Friday afternoon, we had a big reception in a restaurant. We booked the whole restaurant, and we invited Mr. van Belkom and Mr. Nelty and their wives, and we had a lovely afternoon. And then when everybody was having a good time, it came the time to separate and go our way. And we then went on our honeymoon trip to Namakwa land and to the southern parts of Namibia.
And I think within a few days the feast started that year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shadrach Rapotu from Raslo in Pretoria. Let me take you down memory lane about the journey that we undertook, all of us. Remember the Worldwide Church of God. Remember the night to be much remembered. Remember foot washing and communion ceremonies at night. Remember feast days and booklets. There was also this fellowship to remember. I am glad that the ceremony of foot washing is now done during daytime. Here in Raspo, we have a community of elderly people, namely Mr. and Mrs. Harley, Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, Mrs. Louisa Mela, and Mrs. Mulet. Can you imagine these elderly people having to drive at night with this load shedding and potholes? This is part of Healthy Church. We now have women ministers like Mrs. Rapeto and Rachel Ramanash, etc. Happy 60th anniversary, Grace International Community, I think.
This is Robert Cloud-Smith of the Cape Town North Congregation. My history in the church started in 1966, and it was during this time that I found myself asking many questions. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? How many religions and why so many Christian faiths with different beliefs? I would cry out to God, show me the way and help me discover our true purpose in life. Then a friend gave me the Plain Truth magazine and introduced me to a number of booklets. Why were you born and does God exist? And that's when my journey in our fellowship began. I had the privilege of attending Anniversary University from 1969 to 1973. Loved every minute of it, the friendships, an archaeological project which was out of this world, experiencing, tasting and enjoying the history and land where Jesus and his disciples walked. On my return to South Africa, I joined the Everite Group, where I served for 8 years and studied industrial psychology. My role as Group HR Coordinator was serving 5,000 people, and that is a job that I really relished and enjoyed. And then I received a call from the regional head of Southern Africa, Dr. McCarthy, who invited me to join ministry. This was not the news I wanted to hear. All was going well, and my future potential was something I was deeply excited about. And so I walked the streets of Johannesburg all night with my heart pounding and finally realized at the break of dawn that this was a calling into ministry which is in God's hands. So I accepted the invitation and began my role in ministry, pastoring churches throughout Southern Africa. And my special love and passion was working with young people and coordinating the summer educational program over many years. I was then asked to serve as office manager due to my background in industry, and also served our European offices in a period of organizational transformation. Then, from 1992 onwards, came the crucial defining moment in the history of our fellowship. After years of research and review by the church leaders and theological team, it led to the realization that we had to make some significant changes and transform the church into a new way of thinking based on the new covenant. It was during this time that I began the transformation of our fellowship, a difficult and painful time as we embarked on various initiatives to help members understand the nature of change. We established 91 care groups, visited local churches in order to help all and sundry understand the shifts in our core beliefs. We sent brochures to 800 members of the Christian community and was interviewed on several radio stations. Furthermore, I was invited to speak about our Christian beliefs, and these were theologians and leaders in the Christian community. Key focus of my message included exclusivity, how we believed we were the only true church, prophecy addiction, our tendency to be very specific with personalities and timelines, and needless to say, this was often found to be incorrect, and legalism, a mixture of Judaism, Old Covenant, and New Covenant teachings. The chairman of the group got up and mentioned to the entire audience, have we all not accumulated baggage over the centuries? And is this not the time for us to also review the basis of our theological teaching? So I go to 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3, where it talks about the speaking in tongues of men and angels. And it talks about resounding gongs or a clanging cymbal. And it talks about the gift of prophecy and the mysteries and the knowledge and the faith that can move mountains and the knowledge of scriptures. But in all of these instances, if we do not love, we have love. We are nothing. Even if we give all our possessions to the poor, love is the center of all things. These scriptures powerfully relate to the current vision of where the church is going into the future, internalizing and practicing the avenues of faith, hope, and love, leading to a beautiful and exciting time of spiritual and continuing growth, with Jesus at the center of the center. This is Robert Klansman of the Cape Town North congregation.
To this effect, I want to relate two stories in my life. I was baptized in July 1975. Interestingly, the first memory that comes to mind happened in 1978, 79 somewhere. And I was at home on leave preparing to go to the feast in Lumkababa. The church group had booked a coach on the train that was leaving Park Station around 19 hours in the evening. So in the morning I was making preparations for the food to eat on the way. And then I was in Karankua then, and I wanted to buy Kentucky for the provision. There was no Kentucky franchise then in Karankua. So I took a bus to Pretoria North to buy the provision. So when I alighted, the bus got off. I was arrested by the police for failing to produce an ID. They took us to the police station to be imprisoned. As we were waiting in the queue there, where they were taking particulars from us, I saw a public phone nearby and called my workplace to go home and fetch my ID and bring it to the police station in Pretoria. In no time, the ID was brought to the police station and I was released. It really was quite a really amazing moment. I was a free man to catch that coach at Park Station and go to the Feast of Tabernacles. It was a hallelujah moment. Praise God. And another moment I want to relate happened 1983, 1980.
What a journey it has been. I remember that Friday night very well. I was 17 way back in 1968. That's when I attended my first Bible study in the Worldwide Church of God. Bob Kleinsmith was also there for the first time. Life in the church was very different in those days. rules were so important and laws were at the center of church life. I remember getting into trouble for my long hair and my sideburns, and there was no makeup for the ladies. And I remember how in those days men were expected to join Spokesman Club. And if there was one thing I hated, I feared, was public speaking. And so I always found an excuse not to be in club. In those days, you had to be baptized to be in club. So I didn't get baptized for a while. And when people asked me why I wasn't in club, I would say, well, I'm not baptized yet. But I'm thankful for what I learned in the old Worldwide Church of God. Maralise and I were given the opportunity to attend Ambassador College together with our two children in the 1980s. And I'm thankful for our triune God for many reasons. And one is He is a God who is active and not passive. He moves in love. Just like God took the initiative and chased after the Apostle Paul and interrupted his journey, which brought him to repentance and moved him from the old covenant to the new covenant, God did the same for the church. He initiated momentous changes, enabling us to understand so much more about who God is and what Jesus has done and who we are because of who God is. We've met many wonderful people who were there way back in 1968 and still with us today. Jack and Joan Johnson and Louise Lees. And we've seen the growth in the young people who attended SEP and how some are serving in different areas of the church today. What a blessing. I'm so thankful for our loving triune God for opening our spiritual eyes and enabling me to do what I do now. In fact, in some ways, I find that I'm more fruitful now in my 70s than ever before. I thought our Zoom Bible study would only last for about 6 months, but almost 3 years later, we're still going strong. 1968 is a long time ago, but here I am, about 55 years later, and so thankful that God has blessed Grace Communion International. We have come a long way. From a church that was law-centered to a church that is Jesus Christ-centered, grace-based, and Spirit-led. The journey with Jesus continues.
Hey everyone, Sean here from Cape Town North Church. I came into the church in the 80s. I was around about 6 years old. In fact, I think it might actually be my 40th year in the church now, so I'm pretty ancient as it stands. When we came into the church, myself and my mom had gone through a pretty rough time. You see, my mom and my dad were involved in a messy divorce. She grew up in a Christian household, but she married a man that was more closely associated with atheism, I think, in reality than he was Christian. And so when she was looking for a church, it was because she was trying to find her way back. And she was drawn to the fact that there was just such an amount of certainty in the legalistic way that we approach things, right? That's one of the advantages of legalism is that it gives you absolute certainty, but that certainty is not necessarily founded in reality. It was a very good time in my life. I remember waking up Saturday mornings, climbing into bed with my mom, and I was doing the correspondence course. I don't know if anybody of you remember that, or reading the worldwide news. In fact, I could read English before my native tongue, Afrikaans, because of the amount of study that we did. We spent the time in communion with one another as family and friends. Friday nights the TV was switched off, it only came on Saturday evening, and we spent a lot of time in fellowship with the people of the church. That was really fond memories for me. As a teenager, I started finding the church very boring, as teenagers tend to do. And then obviously with being a teenager, there's all that social angst and all the awkwardness of becoming an adult. But also trying to understand where you fit into the world. It was a very difficult time for me. But I found that the church there was also very important. It gave me a sense of belonging, it gave me a sense of home. And there were a couple of people in the church, men specifically, that spent time with me and helped me develop into the person that I am today. And I see God's hand in that, I see His grace in that. That even though, my family situation wasn't the ideal, I wasn't in in a nuclear family with a mom and a dad, God provided even in that. As a young adult, I started seeing my freedom. I got my freedom, I started getting a job, and I went wayward. I didn't do the things that I was supposed to do, and I started seeing the consequences of when we don't follow God's way. And I remember it was a very difficult time in my life, and I cried out to God and I asked Him to please help me. And I was at that stage involved in SEP and helping out there, and made the decision to get baptized, and it was a dramatic change in my life. It was one of the biggest positive things in my life came from baptism. And it was once again interesting that I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't perfect. I hadn't done the work that I was supposed to do, but yet God's grace was extended to me, and I went on a different road, and that road led me in a positive direction. And so it was that I eventually found my wife, was also in the church, and we got married, and we got given the opportunity to serve. And then I was faced with a new problem, because although I had personally bought into this idea of God, I wasn't sure if there was scientific evidence for God or historical evidence for God. And so I started a journey of studying apologetics and trying to figure out if God really does exist. And to my surprise, the evidence was overwhelming that God does exist. And so even throughout time and throughout history, His grace is there for us, so that if you seek Him, you can find Him. I look back at my time and I can see the words of the Apostle Paul echoed in the New Testament, where he tells us that the Old Covenant was a schoolmaster, was this teacher that taught us the way. It was very structured, was very disciplined. And although our understanding of it wasn't perfect by any means, it was valuable. It was valuable because it taught us the fundamentals. It taught us to develop a relationship with God. And once again, I see God's grace in there. But at the same time, I see the value in where we are now, where we look at Trinitarian theology and we have a more complete understanding of who God is and how we fit into the big picture. So I guess what I've learned in these 40 years in the church is even if you come from a very legalistic perspective, or you go to something that's more grace-based with a lot more freedom, if you earnestly seek God, if you really try and find Him, He will reveal Himself to you. And I'm deeply thankful for the time that I could have been in Grace Communion International.